According to the testimony, Sarah Cherry, who was babysitting, disappeared from the house where she was babysitting sometime between noon and 3:20 in the afternoon, on Wednesday afternoon. Dennis DeShane, and the police were called and they started looking for her. Dennis DeShane became an object of interest, shall we say, because papers with his name on them were found in the driveway of the house where Sarah Cherry had been babysitting. So they were looking for Dennis DeShane. Well, they found him. He came out of the woods around 8:30 that evening. And he went to a nearby house and he told the man that lived there, I can't find my truck. I went into the woods and I came out and now I can't find my truck. And the man said, well, I'll help you find it. So they looked around for about an hour and they didn't find it. And the man wanted to get back home and watch a TV show. And a police car came along, a sheriff's car. So the man said, why don't you ask these fellows to help you? And DeShane said, yeah, fine, that's a good idea. And he jumped out and jumped in with the sheriff's men. And he was with them from about 8:30 Wednesday night till about 4:20 Thursday morning when they took him home, and he was with his wife the rest of the time. Now the odd thing is, although the blue line represents the time that DeShane's actions are accounted for by the police and other witnesses, the autopsy, the body was found around noon on Friday. And the autopsy was conducted around 2 p.m. And so when the autopsy report tells us that the medical examiner found that the rigor mortis remained in the large joints and fingers but was passing off, if you'll study rigor mortis, and I went into it extensively in the book, rigor mortis in a person only lasts at a maximum of 36 hours. So if the rigor mortis was passing off, then that would mean she died 36 hours before, and that would be the proper opinion according to the textbooks I examined, I read on forensic pathology, and the pathologist I spoke with. And that would put the time of death between 2 and 4 a.m. on Thursday morning. The big problem being, Dennis DeShane had been with the police and other witnesses long before that. And if he was with them, he certainly wasn't murdering little Sarah Cherry. Another thing came to light later. The police reports show that they were trying to use a tracking dog from DeShane's truck, which was found in the woods across the road from where the body would be found. And the tracking dog led them across the road and into that woods, but not to the body. It was leading them off in another direction. And the officer said they heard a commotion in the woods, which they attributed to deer. They never saw the deer, they just figured they must be deer. And this commotion, according to them, occurred at 2 o'clock Thursday morning, which is the earliest time, according to the forensic evidence, when Sarah Cherry could have been murdered. So there exists a possibility that the police were 50 feet away when the murderer was killing her, blundering through the woods with their dog and ignoring the commotion in the woods. So that was the first thing that convinced me that there was something seriously wrong with this case and the prosecution's conduct in this case. And we went on from there.
I think at the time of the trial, the reason that I had my concerns about it was because, well, let me go back a step. All kinds of really nice, quote-unquote, people commit ordinary murders all the time. I mean, the prisons are full of them. People who might be your neighbor, who knows, might be yourself. In a rage, you do something which you then greatly regret the rest of your life. But this wasn't that kind of a murder. This was a long, prolonged, horrible torture of a little girl. And This was not an ordinary murder. It was not committed by an ordinary murderer. And yet this fellow that was being tried had absolutely no record of any sort of violence in his life whatsoever. He had 2 college degrees. He had a degree in agricultural economics. He had a degree in French. Happily married. I recall reading the news, one paper described him as an itinerant French farm worker. Well, he was French, Franco, but he had a farm, but he owned a farm, a very successful farm. This was a guy who was a well-known, well-liked member of his community. And that just did not add up.
But didn't the state present a case that convinced 12 jurors that Dennis DeShane was guilty?
Well, if I had heard what the jury heard, I would have voted that he was guilty. The problem being that there's so much the jury didn't hear because the prosecutors withheld evidence, concealed evidence, misrepresented some of the evidence, and have fought ever since then to suppress everything and to keep from answering any questions or revealing anything that they're not compelled to reveal. It took an act of the legislature to open their files, and even then they didn't reveal everything. Even then, we had to take them to court to get the stuff they were still hiding. And they're still saying that there are police reports, which we know exist, which they cannot find. One of the most amazing stories that I heard about prosecutors making untrue statements. 2 of DeShane's brothers and Carol Waltman, who started Trial and Error, and Senator Judy Parody and Representative Ahern from up in the county got an appointment with Attorney General Carpenter at the time. They were going to ask some questions. How could you believe my brother did this, and what about this evidence and that evidence? And midway through their meeting, Eric Wright walks in. He was the prosecutor, the trial prosecutor. And he says words to the effect that, I don't know what you're all talking about. DeShane confessed to the psychologists, and we have it on videotape. Well, that pretty well broke up the meeting. Everybody left. Senator Parody was very annoyed at the brothers and at Carol Waltman. Why did you bring me here for this? They had a confession. The odd thing is that I've seen that videotape, and there's nothing on it remotely resembling a confession. Now, why does a man say something that's not true? Did you ever see the movie Charade back in 1960 or whatever it was? With Audrey Hepburn in it and Cary Grant. And Audrey Hepburn asks Cary Grant, why do people lie? And he tells her, well, because they want something, and the truth won't get it for them.
It wasn't one of the items that they had that they wanted to see that day. Was a copy of Detective Westrum's notes, which have been unavailable, and that we now know that actually Prosecutor Wright was fetched a copy of those notes on that same day.
Yes, he got it that day, but we don't know that he had it before the meeting. I
Right.
don't know what time.
But they never did get to see the copy of the notes
Oh,
that day
no.
because the meeting was broken up.
Detective Westrum's notes were kept a secret as long as possible until the legislature ordered them opened.
Speaking of County Detective Westrum, just how did he perform? What was it in his notes that bothered you?
I think Detective Westrum's notes is an example of the kind of thing in the book Human Sacrifice that really alarmed me, because there is actually a photocopy of the notes. And when you look at them closely, these are the notes he purportedly used to mount his testimony against Dennis DeShane in the trial. And what he claimed Dennis said was in effect a confession. Why did I kill her? But when years later we finally got a copy of Westrum's actual notes that he took when interviewing Dennis, what we find is that what he wrote down originally was, how could I kill her? And I want to make you look closely at the fact that Westrum himself underlined the word I here. So it reads, and it makes sense of an innocent man protesting his innocence, saying, how could I kill her? But then what happens, if you look closely at the notes, is that sometime later, Westrom crosses out the words "how could," and in his own handwriting again, writes, "Why did I kill her?" But the problem with this is the word "I" is still emphasized the way Westrom wrote it. So in Westrom's new version of what he thinks he heard, we have "why did I kill her?" which is actually nonsensical. A man, guilty or innocent, would not be asking, "Why did I kill her? Why didn't somebody else kill her?" I think what we have to do, we'll never maybe know for sure, but we have to go back to what Westrom wrote down originally. "How could I kill her?" Which sounds exactly like what Dennis would say if he was protesting his innocence. Maybe Westrom was confused and thought that Dennis was guilty and so adjusted his notes to fit his preconception. We may never know, but I know when you read evidence like this, suppressed for many years, it makes you doubt the outcome of the trial considerably.
Well, Bernie, when I brought this subject up to Deputy Attorney General Bill Stokes, he assured me that those two statements mean the same thing. So I guess that's the official state position.
Well, speaking of the state, just what has the state's position been in regards to this case?
Well, the position has been to conceal evidence, suppress evidence, misrepresent the evidence. The prosecutor told the jury, if you can believe this, there are no other suspects in this case. Now, we know that there were at least 2 other suspects thrust at the authorities when the case began. One of them was a fellow named Douglas Senecal, who was related by intermarriage to Sarah Cherry's family, who was already under indictment for sexually molesting his stepdaughter. During the course of this case, Senecal has offered 3 separate alibis, all of which fell apart. But he was never asked to submit to any kind of interrogation by the police. He was never asked to let anyone search his truck. He was never asked for samples of his fingerprints, his blood, or his hair. And then we have the other suspect, a fellow named Jason Fickett. Now, the funny thing about Fickett is, a searcher, when they were still looking for Sarah Cherry, this is on Thursday, the day after she disappeared, the day before the body was found, one of the citizens that was out searching brought to the police, to Detective Hensby, who was in charge of the case, and his partner, Detective Drake, told them that he had found 2 sets of footprints leading down the Fickett Road. Fickett Road is a half a mile from where Sarah Cherry disappeared. Large footprints next to small bare footprints. Now this is interesting because Sarah Cherry is known to have been barefoot when she vanished. Her shoes and socks were left at the house where she had been babysitting. So the detectives followed these footprints to what Detective Hensby's report calls a trailer named Fickett. What it was a name Fickett was up outside the trailer. And at that point, Hensby says he determined that these footprints had no bearing on the case. And he said, let's ask the wardens to look into this tomorrow. Now, back when I was a Treasury agent, we used to call something like that a clue. You're looking for a barefoot girl, and presumably an abductor, and you find large footprints next to small bare footprints leading into a trailer half a mile away. I think I'd have knocked on the door. I think I'd have been in that trailer one way or another, even if the name on the trailer had been George Washington. But the name on the trailer was Fickett. And at that very moment, and for a couple of weeks previously, Detective Hensby and Detective Drake had been investigating Jason Fickett for sexually molesting a 12-year-old girl. Hello. But they decided there was no need to knock on his door because they already knew who committed this crime. He left his name in the driveway. Perfect clue. A little too obvious, maybe.